Prophet of God by Chris Cooper. Chapter 24. Pastor Lee paced across Jesse, who was bound by cords lying on the damp face of the earth. His eyes bounced around and the weight of the air rested heavy against his jaw. Two armed men stood at Jesse's side. The pastor clasped his ring-laden hands together, apparently delighted in himself. Before them all, a bubbling pool of filthy reddish liquid spanned the belly of a noticeable depression in the earth, set distinguished from the dense forestry about. Among other things, a unique series of rock formations resembling those of standing soldiers or jagged teeth surrounded it all. Steam hissed and mounds burst across the surface as boiling mud. Another man, dressed dark and in surplus military gear, having his face covered by a black gator neck, approached from the woods surrounding the strange pool, making his way down the slope which led to the scene. "Your Holiness," he said, "we've got her." He said, looking at Pastor Lee. Just then, a search and rescue drone buzzed in the air overhead, overlooking all of them and sending all their faces skyward. "You think they can see us?" He chuckled. A bead of sweat fell from Jesse's blue eyes, desperately scanned the air. He grabbed a handful of Jesse's shoulders, propping onto his knees. Then, after clasping Jesse's hair, he forced his nose close to his face, saying, "This place is a fucking island in the Pacific." Pastor Lee released Jesse and turned up, mockingly waving his hand at the drone before it zipped away as quickly as it had come. Some brush alongside the depression made way for another incoming group of people. Stepping down into the void, with a pair of Pastor Lee's minions cramming a couple of pistols at her side, was Aunt Tricia, leaves falling before her long brown skirt. She was holding herself upright with a long wooden staff and had her graying hair down. "Patricia," Pastor Lee raised an elated pose. "Thank you for joining us. You're a hard person to summon." Aunt Tricia looked over and laid eyes on Jesse, and the two shared a stricken stare. "Open it, witch," Pastor Lee barked, his fake friendly face collapsing into a snarl. Aunt Tricia simply looked intensely into his eyes. Pastor Lee glanced over to one of his guards, lifting his chin. The man walked over and kneed Jesse across the face, landing onto his jaw with the hard carbon shell of a kneecap. Aunt Tricia started toward her nephew, but was swiftly grappled back by the guards holding her. "I didn't spend the last 2 decades dealing with this fucking place for nothing. I'm going to have it, and you will open it now, you stupid cunt, or I will have your boy made into ribbons you can decorate your fucking pagan altar with, and then you'll open it." Pastor Lee brandished a gun, pointing it directly at Jesse. Aunt Tricia gripped her staff and sighed. "They're not gonna let you get away with this," she declared as she began stepping forward. Tricia positioned herself so that she was able to make a wide view of the churning, sloppy liquid ahead, which made for about the width of a large swimming pool. She raised her hands into the air and, drawing words of an ancient language, she struck the ground below with her wooden staff, sending splatters of red clay upward, marking the folds of her long brown dress. She fixed the staff firmly into the earth and began stepping away. They all watched, laying their focus on the staff that she'd just planted. There was nothing. The staff simply began to sag to the right a little bit. This better not be Pastor Lee began, but Tricia interrupted him with a hand up. Then, the muck around the staff's base began to vibrate, sending tiny ripples out from its center. The staff began to quake, and with it the ground itself tremored, only very faintly and then increasingly. The liquid swirled in tiny ripples and then began stirring more and more violently, gurgling and bursting as if to make the noise of an empty stomach. A nauseous muck began to climb up the sides of the wooden staff, followed by bursts of mud and fluid from beneath. The staff stiffened straight, standing firmly now. The whole party began to step back as the dirty pool erupted into a swell, and the ripples grew and grew. Their eyes locked ahead of them. They all watched as the staff itself began to be consumed by a rising tide, and along with the flow its barky exterior expanded. First, one tiny limb spiraled from a knot in the side of the wood, climbing into the air, then a second, and a third, all while the pool beneath moaned and the grayish-red stuff churned steadily more clearly. After further groaning from what felt like the center of the earth, several planks of wood, sticks of varying sizes, pieces of rock and of iron began stirring into the mix as the swell yet climbed up and up. The staff soon stretched out into a small tree with very little branches adorned with leaves of brilliant sticky green, gradually becoming swallowed by the fluid now erupting forth. An ambient glow of green and blue began flooding the hypnotic scene, as the muck cleared and began unfurling into clear water as liquid diamond. What appeared to be artifacts of flintlock muskets and swords, and then a banner, all being dragged back down, becoming suppressed by the rising tide and whirl. Then a series of bones churned up, which could be seen beneath the sparkling tide, and a few skulls even floated to the surface only to be lunged beneath again as the Great Depression filled. To the awestruck witnesses, all of them, suddenly water of an exceedingly pure and luminous character replaced the muck entirely. Before them all stretched out an emerald blue glitter, lapping against the shoreline seamlessly, at last coming to a final stillness. In spite of it all, still somehow pulsating. The ground all around, wherever the waters met the earth, retreated in waves of vitality and color. Every broken stem or crusty leaf or fallen limb to be found became transformed and burst into vibrant green and striking colors of many kinds. Ragged shrubs and saplings stretched into full, shameless bloom, and flowers of unspeakable beauty and luster opened their faces to greet rays of sunlight, now piercing the dismal sky from above, giving flight to the dominion of the haze of soot which had colored it before, directly above the area. Pastor Lee stood frozen, along with the rest. It's fucking real? He finally spittled beneath a gleaming stare, before turning himself to face the others, leaving the diamond liquid to his back. The guardsmen swayed to their gaze, only lazily holding their weapons against their respective hostages, unable to retrieve their look from the allure of the crystal water. Tricia turned to face Jesse again with a worrisome frown. It is a little ironic. Pastor Lee rested his chin on top of his hand, holding the gun limp, facing Jesse. One so close to eternal life, yet so close to death all at once. How can opposites like that meet? I'm sorry. He paused, grinning, and flipped the pistol upright. Now you will see the Most High. All of a sudden, the air itself behind the pastor shimmered into a mirage, as if the atmosphere itself around him ripped open. Out from a discolored void, a black leather glove slyly drew itself over the Pastor Lee's mouth from behind him, and then a long blade rose from between the buttons of his shirt and tie, gushing blood, and sending a few droplets into the glistening blue water, causing a brief reaction of tumult and steam on the contact. The blade was borne out of his heart and then slipped out, all while Lee's face stretched into a twisted, hysterical smile. The pastor fell face down into the dirt of the new shoreline, revealing a looming figure in a tattered cloak behind him floating midair, till they delicately landed onto the ground. It was the prophet, Prophet. Aunt Tricia pounced toward her nephew suddenly, driving him to the ground, while the armed men, startled, took aim ahead at the black figure, ready to open fire. The prophet just raised a palm, and a tremendous otherworldly voice beamed from inside the mask. "They're yours, Jin." In that moment, all of Pastor Lee's company rocketed into the air as if hurtled by a gust of wind, one after the next, when each of their limbs broke out of socket in wails of agony, twisting them all into a Picasso painting-like human mass. A flame burst from their insides before crashing to the ground below in a torrent of fire and embers, leaving only a heap of ash. The prophet then gently drove their sword into a little cluster of budding violets by their side. Tricia rose and faced the personage. She approached the black mass slowly from behind. The prophet turned around to face the shimmering water, resting their gaze for a moment. Long black electrical cords dangled from some chaotic assemblage fixed on the back of their cloak and spewing out like a porcupine. "You're one of the keepers?" Tricia spoke gingerly. The eyes of the mask fell onto Tricia as she cautiously approached, revealing a pair of blue and of red glowing circles, dimming and coming back again. The prophet lifted up their hands and delicately touched the cheekbones of their mask. The golden seam down the center of the mask suddenly began to fracture, and upon it, unfolding, revealed a deep chasm within the blackness of the hood. There was no image coming up, except nothingness. Then, the prophet, having blood from Pastor Lee, wiped his face to reveal a grin beneath the void and one eye of a human shape. "Adam?" Tricia collapsed unconscious. The prophet, Adam Lee, turned back around toward the glistening spring, unreactive to Tricia, and he stooped down, taking into their palm one dollop after the next of the crystal water. They brought the water to their own hideous face, and there followed a thrashing as pieces of electronic equipment fell down into the waters and melting into drops of metal like mercury and churning rubber liquid. Jesse began swinging his bound limbs furiously on the ground. When the prophet arose, a man's face appeared as he shed the black hood from his head, a man of young age, having dampened dark hair and fair complexion. Lee approached Jesse, and he knelt. After drawing back strands of his hair, he rested a glove on his knee and stooped. Offering a smile toward the shaken captive beneath him, he said, "Do you know what you're looking at, Jesse?" Lee reached into the folds of his cloak and removed a book and began to read aloud. "Whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst, but the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water, springing up into everlasting life." Jesse just groaned from the covering of his face. "Shh." Lee removed Jesse's mouth gag and lifted a piece of his hair away from his eyes. "I always thought you had your father's beautiful eyes," Lee sighed, admiring. "As blue skies you could get lost in, huh?" Yet crouching, Adam Lee secured Jesse's chin softly between his gloved fingers. "It's too bad that he had to get caught up with that bitch. We could have spent eternity together. You won't have to worry, though. It'll be like none of this ever happened for you, son. And it's not your fault. It'll be all right. Just a moment to end the rest. To you, it'll be as if it never were," Lee said, smiling before calmly stroking Jesse's forehead. "Now come on." Lee collected Jesse and carried him across his forearms. Jesse was just too exhausted to resist anymore. Pushing against the folds of the water with his own legs, Adam Lee delicately hauled Jesse, toward the center of the spring. Ripples ran across the face of the water as they approached the center. Even though the day had since restored its light, the beautiful glow of the still waters persisted in reflecting off of the two, giving its own light. Just as above, so from below, creating a soft ambience of noble ambience. Jesse, his neck resting against Lee's forearm, began looking across the limbs of the trees above, swaying in quiet grace before an open blue sky, touched by the breeze. In the portrait of the drifting white clouds hung in his shivering eyelids, he could just hear the whispering air through the branches. Lee lifted his head skyward, too, and spoke. "Once baptized by holy flame, and now by holy water, I baptize you, Jesse, son of the prophet, in the name of the Lord. Amen." With that, Jesse was lowered into the water, his vision just blurring away. Adam Lee held the young man down in the water. Jesse began to convulse, choking on washes of fluid, and then began to violently kick and thrash beneath the immaculate surface. With each struggle to breathe and every gulp, Jesse could feel his own weight diminishing, and the coinciding strength of Adam's arms holding him down increasing. Soon, the weight of Jesse's body began to shrink itself as his actual bones and frame began to retreat. In the whirl of chaos, a numbing stillness then overcame Jesse, and in his absolute panicked mind, there began flashing memories from throughout his lifetime, back and back. With every passing image in his mind caught, he felt as if he saw as much as he felt. All the pain, the joy, the heights, the valleys, alike, time itself began to melt into a singularity. An alleviation and a total lifting washed over him. As his consciousness drained away, he ceased fighting. The end of a long Damascus steel blade shattered through Adam Lee's ribs. Belting in agony, Adam released Jesse's body as the powerful blow descended on him from behind, nearly lifting him up. A young man, wearing a white linen sash over his shoulders, with dangling strings of a rich azure pattern and a towering build, got Lee into a chokehold as blood began to amply pollute the pristine waters. A shockwave surged all around, sending the tide of the alluring water exploding into a terrible corruption and stir. The air itself shook in a frenzy as the earth tremored all about. Meanwhile, below the surface, the shadow of a long beast glided toward Jesse's descending body after Adam's release and swept the boy up onto its back. In a moment, the snout of a crocodile showed itself, lifting Jesse into the air, floating just above the surface of the water. A maelstrom formed as the swell climbed viciously around the two struggling men, with the red blood of Adam Lee shedding from his wound, contrasting the rich blue-green spring. The water turned a hue of purple around him and the man, and they began to descend, being enveloped by a powerful force from below. "I guess I did turn out to be your Judas," said the assailant, grasping Adam Lee. The hero managed to let out a shout above the waves. "Just one more time, Jin," he choked, propping Lee with one arm as they fell together. The crocodile rotated its body to reveal Jesse, now the figure of a child of 6 or 7 in appearance, with his drenched hair lying against his arm, across the scaly platform, only tucked into the square of his elbow and asleep. The man nodded somberly, spitting up the corrupt liquid as it climbed his jawline. "Jesse, my son, I'm sorry. I'm sorry." He nodded his head. It was the prophet, Prophet. The two men were soon no more. From the depression in the earth, someplace in Luke's wood, a torrent rose to spill over the rocky crags which jutted out from the earth like teeth. The crocodile, carrying Jesse on its back, glided along the current until the water met a tributary of Gogwak River, some tumble below. Hurtling downward, the beast deposited Jesse on the dry surface of a gravelly inlet. Lying there, almost amongst scattered items of some makeshift campsite about him, Jesse was left heaving up mouthfuls of water, and as a result his body shuddered violently, returning his form to match his actual age. The waters of the spring finally married the river, and as the waves drove across, either bank of Gogwak exploded back into life, after years of neglect and pollution and recklessness annihilated instantly, shedding in vital summer lush for miles downstream. book is Prophet of God by Chris Cooper, Profit, Prophet of God, in case you're just tuning in. The next one will be the last chapter.